By 1982, Skytrain had been flying for 5 years. Laker knew he was in trouble. His balance sheet was stretched, but he was still hoping he'd be able to pull through. Laker's bank, though, was unwilling to wait any longer for repayment.
On the 2nd of February, I'd been with Freddie in New York, and we were making an advertisement to promote that year's flights. We were assuring people that Laker Airways' future was secure and that everything was fine and we would fly on through. We flew home and straight into the bankers saying, well, you know, can you let us have our £5 million back?
The bank wanted £5 million as proof that Laker was solvent. For an airline, it wasn't a huge sum of money, even in those days. But Laker couldn't produce it at a moment's notice.
Effectively, our bankers said, if you don't repay this by 5 o'clock this afternoon, we are going to call in the receivers.
During the day and into the night, Freddie would phone anybody and everybody he could think of who might be able to help.
He called the bank and said, look, I need more time, I must have more time. And they said, all right, well, you've got until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Freddie Laker worked throughout the night, but no one came forward with the money. His last chance was a financial group in Japan.
At about 5 o'clock in the morning, I think the telephone call came through from Japan, and it was a no.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, the bank said, right, that's it, the receiver is on his way to Gatwick, please cease operating.
At that point, I drafted the press statement.
I went down to our operations room and I called back aircraft that were halfway to Tenerife with 350 people on board and turned them round in mid-air.
Well, we'd taken off for the Mediterranean from Manchester. We got a call 2 hours out, I think it was, to return back to Manchester. Nothing was told to us at that time of what the reason was.
Having called in the receivers, we got in the car to drive up to London. I drove and we turned the radio on and the statement was read out. It's 25 years ago.
Around the world, thousands of Laker Airways passengers were stranded at airports. Freddie Laker was shattered.
He'd always succeeded, and this really was, I think, the first time when he'd actually lost. And I think it did. I think it hurt him very deeply indeed.
You know, Skytrain was his baby. Not only is it something that gets kind of torn away from you, but it's also very public. You know, and having the whole world kind of watching it, I think, amplifies it for anyone.
Laker's downfall coincided with a personal crisis. His third wife, Patricia, had filed for divorce and had taken their 4-year-old son, Freddie Allen, to live in America. In the darkest moment of his career, Laker met Jacqueline Harvey, an air hostess whom he would marry 2 years later.
He was very lonely when his friends deserted him, especially when he was walking along the street and then people would cross on the other side and try to avoid him, and he would deliberately say, "Hello, how are you?" And he said they'd hurry on with their heads down and wouldn't talk to him.
Down but not out, Freddie Laker was convinced that he had been brought down by collusion between the big airlines and the government. At the time, British Airways was a state-owned enterprise. Insiders agreed with Laker that in the price war with Skytrain, it had been operating at a huge loss.
It was clear that the illegal acts of the other airlines in putting pressure on McDonnell Douglas and GE to withdraw their funding had worked, that there was no help going to come from the government. I mean, the whole thing stank, frankly.
I've spoken with members of the receiving team subsequently, and they said, yeah, we knew we were going down to Gatwick to close down Laker Airways. We'd been preparing for it for a month.
Laker had one last card to play. In the US, he filed a criminal conspiracy lawsuit against the major airlines. Laker used American antitrust laws, which exist to prevent corporations from stifling competition.
Bob Beckman, his American lawyer, had obtained information under the Freedom of Information Act in the States, which was dynamite. And it quite clearly showed that the national airlines, British Airways, Pan Am, Lufthansa, Sabina, one or two others, had conspired together to kill off Laker.
Alarm bells were ringing in Whitehall and the White House. If Freddie Laker won his case, the potential damages could bankrupt the major Anglo-American carriers. For Margaret Thatcher, now Prime Minister of Britain, there was another concern.
At the time that BA was being privatised, the government desperately wanted BA to be sold off, and so there was huge political pressure on a deal being done.
Worried that the Laker case might jeopardize her plan, Thatcher pleaded with her friend, the US President Ronald Reagan, to intervene.
Centred on British Airways, the British case was not without its attractions for the President's purist free enterprise instincts. Told that Mrs. Thatcher was trying to free the airline from state ownership and that a criminal investigation in America, with consequent publicity and financial ramifications, would impair the airline's saleability, White House sources reveal that the President had little difficulty making up his mind.
At President Reagan's behest, the U.S. Justice Department stopped its criminal investigation of the accused airlines. It was only years later that Laker discovered that Margaret Thatcher, the politician who had praised him to the skies, had failed him in his hour of need.
I think he felt betrayed. He'd been Maggie Thatcher's blue-eyed boy, you know, he was all there for the little man on his own making it, and then she sort of shut him off, and I think he was quite bitter about it.
Freddie Laker had one last option. Under the same antitrust laws, he pursued a civil suit in the U.S. The case was finally settled out of court. Laker was awarded a compensation deal worth $300 million in total value. It allowed him to pay off his creditors and staff. He reluctantly accepted $8 million as personal compensation. Disillusioned with Britain, Laker moved to Florida to be close to his son, Freddie Allen. Later, he settled in the Bahamas with his fourth wife, Jacqueline. But Laker couldn't live without aviation. In his sunset years, he started Laker Bahamas, carrying passengers to and from the USA. He also tried a new luxury transatlantic service.
Well, have a great holiday, and we'll see you on the way back.
But neither was as successful as his earlier ventures. Laker lived life to the full, but he had one great sadness: the death of his first son, Kevin, who was killed in a car crash.
On the anniversary of his death, he would always put on Kevin's slippers and his cardigan. He'd be crying his eyes out. I'd say, "What's the matter?" He says, "I'm just thinking about Kevin." He never got over it. It was a big void in his life.
Freddie Laker was a man ahead of his time. His vision inspired a new generation of aviation entrepreneurs. In the 21st century, no-frills flying has become a major industry, and low-cost airlines such as Southwest and EasyJet have become icons of our time.
Freddie Laker will always be a great inspiration to all of us because he was a true pioneer. He was a little too early for his own commercial benefit, but he took a risk, and I will always admire entrepreneurs who are willing to take a risk.
On 9th February 2006, Freddie Laker died in Florida at the age of 83. He was buried with a mobile phone, an essential item in his business career. But Laker's revolution in the sky is here to stay at long last.